Shabbat Shalom. So the Torah portion for this Shabbat is one that contains the most famous texts in the Torah. We got the Ten Commandments, the second iteration, and we got the Shema. Va'etchanan, it's Genesis. It's wishful thinking.
Soon enough.
Yeah. Well, we gotta get through the high holidays first. It is Dvarim. It is Deuteronomy chapter 6. But I don't want to talk about those two tonight. I want to talk about the very beginning of the parsha, and the word with which this parsha begins is Va'etchanan. Va'etchanan, which means Moses supplicated, cried out, prostrated himself almost before God. He's unable to leave his place. He's unable to enter the land. He knows he's going to die. And you can imagine the torment in his soul. There's a story, actually it's a true story. When I lived in Albuquerque, a block away, we lived in a very rural part of town. There were cows and horses, and it was great. But there was a property, it was a very open property, but there was an invisible fence. Anybody have an invisible fence for their dog on their property? Okay. An invisible fence is a torture device for a dog, basically. It doesn't hurt them, but it's a shock collar, and if you go beyond the border of the fence, it shocks you and the dog goes back. And I was once looking at this dog, and it was a big German Shepherd, and a friend of mine said, that dog is living in hell. Because just 2 feet in front of him, there are squirrels, there are rabbits, there are balls, and he can't get to them. You could see him salivating. He could see it. He couldn't do anything about it. And in this week's Parsha, Moses is kind of like that poor dog. He begins his discourse with the following words, Va'etchanan, I pleaded with the Eternal at the time, saying, God, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or on earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see that good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. And then Moses turns to the Israelites and says, but the Eternal was wrathful with me on your account. Little blame he's putting, that's neither here nor there. Would not listen to me. The Eternal said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go to the summit of Pisgah and gaze out to the west, to the north, the south, and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not go across that yonder Jordan. Give Joshua his instructions and imbue him with strength and courage, for he shall go ahead of the people, and he shall allot to them the land that you can only gaze at. There have been so many times that I've read this story and found myself profoundly moved by Moses' pain and frustration. He spent his entire life shepherding the children of Israel through the wilderness of Sinai. His was a thankless task, filled with disappointments and frustration at the end of his life because of one small mistake, striking a rock instead of speaking to it. He is unable to reach his goal of entering into the land toward which he has guided his people and dedicated his entire life. So Moses is angry. He's frustrated and afraid. He sees everything that he stood for slipping away with the knowledge of his impending death and the fact that he's not going to be joining his people. Now, the truth is, so much of what we do in our lives is geared toward achieving our goals and accomplishing the tasks we have set out for ourselves. Our entire culture is built on the idea of delayed gratification and sacrifice for the sake of a future reward. We work hard for the reward that will come at the end of our labors. But for too many, however, when we're ready to finally cash in and retrieve our long-awaited rewards, our dreams and visions are thwarted by multitudes of factors, illness or death or finances or changes in life circumstances. As the old Yiddish proverb states, der Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. People plan, and God laughs. Now, next week, I'm going to begin teaching a class called Emanuel Elders. This will be the fourth time I've taught it here at Temple, but I taught another version of the class several times in my previous congregation in Albuquerque. And the basic idea of this class comes from the Mishnah, Tractate Avot, where we find that when a person reaches the age of 50 years old, they've reached an age of Eitzah, of counsel. This program is designed for men and women in our congregation who have already celebrated their 50th birthday or who are about to reach this important milestone, as well as those of us who are older. We'll meet for the next 6 weeks leading up to the high holidays, and among other things, we'll study the book of Ecclesiastes, or Kohelet in Hebrew, and we're going to review ancient and modern ethical wills. We also will spend time engaging in personal exploration of what it means to understand and accept the role of elder in the community. And at the conclusion of the program, each member of the class will be given an opportunity, not required, but given an opportunity to write an ethical will, part of which will be presented to the congregation at Sukkot services this year. On Sukkot, we traditionally read the book of Kohelet, of Ecclesiastes. So I've taught this class, maybe 10 times. And the older I get, the more it impacts me. I'm constantly amazed at the wisdom of the participants, most of whom are older than me, but not all. And when I first started teaching it, I was under the age of 50. And over the years, the lessons we have shared with one another have become increasingly more intense and relatable to me each time I have taught it. I know several of you have taken the class, and some of you have signed up for it this year. One of the key themes of Ecclesiastes is similar to what Moses was experiencing. Our mortality and the cruelty of aging and decay take away the meaning and purpose of our lives. Vanity of vanity, Kohelet writes, all is vanity. Our lives are but a passing shadow, a blowing of wind. And this narrative, supposedly written by a king of Jerusalem, patterned after King Solomon, is filled with hopelessness. After all that we accomplish in life, it implies when we die, when we leave this earth, nothing is left behind and our legacies disappear. Now, during the course of the Emanuel Elder class, we examine the legacy of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes. We challenge one another to compare his views on mortality, life, death, and meaning with our own. And one of the key takeaways that I've always felt after reading and teaching Kohelet is that the author is incorrect in his assumptions and his conclusions about the futility of life and of legacy. He writes of his loneliness and he writes of his aloneness, but what he fails to see is actually hidden within his own name, Kohelet. Now, Kohelet comes from the Hebrew word, the same root as kahal, or kihila, which means community or coming together. And the author feels worthless because he's unable to see himself in the context of community. He only writes of his own despair, but fails to see the beauty and the lasting legacy that his leadership, his achievements, and most importantly, his relationships with others has bequeathed to those who read his words. And the deliberate irony of the text is that the one who bears the word community in his name, Kohelet, is unable to see the profound gift to sharing his life with others that he has been given. Now, the end of Moses' life can be seen as tragic, yes, and yet it doesn't have to be. How many of us really achieve all the goals that we set out for ourselves? There's too much in this world over which we have no control. We don't know what will happen in the future. We can only appreciate what has brought us to the present. I think about this in light of COVID. All of us were impacted by the experience of quarantine and self-isolation that we experienced during the COVID pandemic. It forced many of us to look at our lives and ourselves in brand new ways. We were forced to slow down, to appreciate our blessing in a time of uncertainty and fear. Now, yes, COVID took a terrible toll on our physical health and our mental health. It radically transformed our economy and changed the way we work. But it also taught some of us a powerful lesson: the need to see our lives and our meaning and our purpose in a new light. Many of the goals and objectives we set for ourselves were thwarted, set aside, or radically changed as we confronted our mortality and counted our blessings. My daughter was supposed to get married. We postponed the wedding twice, but she got married. And I have a grandson, in case you didn't know, if you want to see a picture. You see, life is a gift. Our task is not merely to teach or to reach a destination, but rather to appreciate every moment we are gifted with, and more importantly, to do so in the context of sacred community. Kehila, kahal, kohelet. They say that the entire book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell to the children of Israel. It's his ethical will. And he begins, as we read this week, with anger and fear. But as the chapters unfold, we also see how Moses comes to appreciate both his legacy and the value of his life, despite the fact that he will never be able to enter into the promised land. I think we can all learn from Moses. Each of us has the potential to live a life filled with meaning and purpose, even if we never achieve the goals we set out for ourselves. And that, my friends, I believe is the key to a meaningful life. That we share it with others. That is what being part of a sacred community, this congregation, is all about. That's why Temple Emanuel is so important, or any synagogue, or any sacred community. It is here that we are given the gifts of connection with one another and with God. And so as we continue through the end of the summer and we look ahead to the month of Elul, which is rapidly approaching, we pray that we may continue to learn, to grow, and to share together. Shabbat Shalom.